With this session update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. Governor Walz released his supplemental budget, which leaves $1.2 billion on the bottom line to address needs that may arise from the emerging COVID-19 outbreak. Here's that news conference.
Good morning, everyone. Today, Lieutenant Governor Flanagan and I are prepared to release our administration's recommended supplemental budget. Those of you in this room know that as far back as the November forecast numbers, we were stressing the need to be cautious, the need to make sure that rainy day funds were replenished, and the need to make sure we focused on those most pressing needs that Minnesotans were experiencing. I'm committed to ensuring the state of Minnesota is prepared for whatever comes our way. Minnesotans know preparing for those unexpected things in life is the right thing to do. Having plans in place and resources ready and stocked is the right thing to do. That's why my #1 priority of the 2020 supplemental budget proposal is to maintain our state's rainy day accounts, savings accounts, and keeping money on the bottom line. From there, our budget addresses emergency responses and critical preparedness for our state's needs. In putting together the supplemental budget, I took into consideration, as we were already forecasting in November, the potential for economic downturn and uncertainty, now that has been exacerbated by coronavirus and other factors, and being prepared for other potential incidents such as spring flooding. The supplemental budget is fiscally responsible, focuses on the safety and well-being of Minnesotans. This is not a budget year. This is a year to pass a robust bonding bill, address emergencies that are addressed in this supplemental budget, and paying back the budget reserves. Commissioner Franz will be taking you through some of the details, and then we'll be glad to answer some questions. Commissioner Franz?
Thank you, Governor. You know, the first element of this budget proposal is one of making sure that we have fiscal stability and replenishing the budget reserve. A full reserve is not only an important element of Minnesota's preparation for changing economic times, it is also a key ingredient for credit rating agencies to view our status as a state in terms of our AAA credit rating. Given the level of uncertainty in our economy, our supplemental budget leaves $1.2 billion on the bottom line. Lastly, with our continued commitment to strong fiscal management, we again maintain structural balance in the future, which is when projected revenue exceeds projected spending in a biennium. With our projected balance announced during the February forecast, we were able to fund $257 million in emergency needs and critical priorities. Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan will go into more details, but I want to start with some overall priorities that have strong support. First of all, protecting Minnesotans from COVID-19, which has already been signed into law, and the governor will talk about more to come. Keeping Minnesotans resilient by replenishing the disaster assistance contingency account. Responding to the mental health crisis. Keeping our communities safe and ensuring transit safety. Preventing farm accidents. Making Minnesota Real ID ready. Combating youth vaping and helping families afford child care. Lastly, we urge passage, as the governor mentioned, of the local jobs and projects plan that supports many deserving investments in the long term for Minnesota. We also need to maintain our state assets in the future, and we have the capacity to borrow money at very low rates and still invest over the next 2 to 4 to 5 years, which might also be a counter-cyclical message or opportunity for given the economy and the current situation. And turn it back over to you, Governor.
Thank you, Commissioner. And again, as we went back to November and then again when the February numbers came out, this is what we anticipated. We saw an 11-year bull market run that most experts anticipated. We said at that time there were yellow lights flashing. We're seeing again today that some of those factors, of course, a global pandemic. So to be prepared, to be ready, Minnesota with this budget and with the bonding proposal put forward is in as strong as fiscal shape as any state in the nation. It ensures that there's flexibility on the bottom line to use our public health system and our partners, which we have been very clear about. And again, I want to make note the bipartisan collaboration. We have anticipated that cases of coronavirus would increase. We're seeing that pattern play out. We know that there is more to come, and there's going to be over the next coming hours and days decisions that will need to be made to make sure that we flatten the spread of that curve, to make sure that we start moving into that community mitigation phase, as that dial starts turning up of some of the things that we can take into consideration. Having that rainy day fund, having a solid budget, finishing the work at the legislature so we can focus on our main priority is protecting Minnesotans and making sure our economy's resiliency is there. I think something of note to tell you is the thoughtfulness of this. I'm not sure that I can say this factually, but I would guess, maybe you could help me, this is a one-page budget. So it's not often you get a one-page budget. It is a one-page budget focusing on those priorities of emergency and responses that Minnesotans need to move forward. So with that, we would certainly be glad to answer any questions.
Governor, did I understand Commissioner France correctly that you were proposing leaving $1.2 billion on the bottom line?
That is correct.
I think that, I don't know if that's unprecedented, but that's a large amount. How can you enforce that, for lack of a better term, given the demands by Democrats in the House on early childhood education and Republicans in the Senate on tax cuts?
Well, I think these are realistic folks, too. When we've seen the largest stock in the stock market that we've probably seen in a generation, where we've seen an unprecedented global pandemic, where we know we have to pay back the funds, and what they understand is what the commissioner was talking about. When revenues decrease more than expenditures are out there, they know that we can't get into a position where programs that are protecting Minnesotans, especially the most vulnerable, are cut. So I think this situation has rapidly evolved. I'm grateful to the leadership of Commissioner Franz and our state economists of nonpartisan folks who were predicting where this would be so that we could craft this budget to end up where we're at. I think leaving that money on the bottom line, I would say the rapidly unfolding need, we're going to, again, within a very short amount of time, as we start communicating and coordinating, making sure Minnesotans hear a coordinated message, we are thinking of things, and the legislature's thinking of things like, what do we do with folks who don't have paid leave? How do we make sure that happens? So there are going to be resources needed during this pandemic that it makes sense to me to leave those numbers on the bottom line so that we're in a position to be flexible and react. So I think there are competing needs, but I think what you'll see, and you saw it in the response to the first tranche of COVID-19 resources that were sent to us, I think the legislature understands this, and there will be a day. There are priorities that are absolutely critical to me that aren't in here, things that I have spent my whole career trying to advocate for, but now is not the time to do that, and I think that'll be the message.
Is it fair to say that the COVID-19 pandemic is now tempering expectations by yourself and also other lawmakers around how conservative lawmakers and yourself should be?
I think it is. I think some are kind of catching up with us. Again, I would say those of you who were there, I started delivering this message of let's be responsible. I think listening to the experts that were out there and seeing this curve. And again, regardless of if COVID-19 were here or not, I think most of the indicators were that there would be a slowdown and it would be prudent for us to be prepared for a rainy day fund. I do think now what we're seeing both globally and we're seeing in other states, that I think that probably has tempered expectations to do our number one priority, and that is to the health and safety of Minnesotans, but to make sure that there's things we can do. And I think Commissioner Franz's point on countercyclical, if this, and again, we've entered bear market territory, this is exactly the times when you have the most affordable interest rates we've ever seen, and having these projects. And when you do a bonding bill, to keep in mind, from the shovel-ready projects to redoing some of the main storm sewers under Minneapolis, that may be 4 years out. You're creating that stream that will keep the economy going.
Governor, what about early childhood education? House Democrats had said they wanted to spend the surplus on pre-K and early childhood education. I don't see that here.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to this. I think I had been again, certainly believe that that is a worthy cause. It's something that we need to do. I just think the situation has changed in a manner that, for us to understand both the rainy day funds of the $491 million, inflationary costs, and now the need, I don't think it is probably out of the realm that hospitals will be coming to the legislature in the coming days and asking for upwards of $100 million for COVID responses. Those are the types of things that I think now, and these are all worthy causes. I think what we had to do is the triage work Minnesotans expect us to do, for example, disaster assistance contingency account. Spring flooding does not care that we're in the middle of a COVID crisis, and we're going to, and our emergency management system is preparing for that eventuality of what that will look like. So I think expectations will be tempered now. Now is not the time to do this. You're seeing the same, I think, attitude in Washington, D.C. at the federal level of them starting to think about how do we respond differently. I'm just, again, want to thank folks who had the foresight years ago to have a rainy day fund. I want to thank Commissioner Franz and Britta Rayton, our budget director, for making smart choices to put us in a position. This is an enviable position that many states wish they were in, for us to leave that money there to respond flexibly. And the good thing is when it comes to early childhood, we're right back here in 2021 in a budget year where that's exactly what we should be looking at. But I do want to note, and if you will note in here, there is a serious investment in mental health care for our children. And we're seeing that play out, that schools know that they're under incredible pressure. We don't have enough of those mental health professionals there. So this starts to get at some of that. So,
Thank you. Governor Coleman has asked Biz Meyer and Franz to go back and update the revenue forecast now, not waiting for the next cycle because of what's happened since its last forecast.
You know, one of the things that this is obviously a changing situation. When we released the forecast on February 27th, 2 weeks ago, at that time, some of the information we were relying on from IHS, our consultants, was even earlier in February. Well, IHS Consultants has recently changed their economic outlook just several days ago from 2.1% for this year, 2020, to now 1.8%. But that was several days ago. So clearly the situation is changing, but we're not going to have an opportunity to really change numbers until we see this play out a little bit longer. But we will be monitoring this on a daily basis, providing the governor and the leaders with information about changing revenue streams, about changing expenditures. Both sides of the equation are changing on a daily basis, and that's what we need to monitor on a daily basis and be able to provide good updates. And we will provide an April 10th economic update. That's our next scheduled one, but we'll not wait until then if we need to.
Governor, can you talk? Do your recommendations come with any suggestions for time management on the part of the legislature? You know, what needs to get done now in case the plug needs to be pulled on the session?
Yes, and I don't want to speak out of turn for the legislative leaders, but we have had, we're in close contact now. The upside of this is that you see the collaboration around COVID is also extending to talking about the legislative calendar. I would encourage them, it would be my suggestion, that in a non-budgetary year, there sounds like there's a lot of agreement on every one of the four legislative leaders. The four corners have indicated they want to get a fairly robust bonding bill done. It would be my suggestion to them is to try and wrap that up. And I say that with Minnesotans, and we'll be having a lot more information, as I said, over the coming hours and days about as the mitigation, the public mitigation starts to step up. It makes sense to me to make sure that our democratic process plays itself out. But again, we're already starting to see people question whether gather in the Capitol, do things. I think that they could get this done. I think we could get a bonding bill done. I think we could do a supplemental budget focusing on emergencies. And I think then we could get down to the work of making sure we're implementing what's coming, because we know what the curve looks like. We said it last week that being there last Thursday, from this Thursday, that the state would look very, very different. I think I would not be speaking out of turn to say from this Thursday to next Thursday, things in the state will look very different. I think last night's news that was coming across so quickly when we saw the NBA cancel their season, when we saw Tom Hanks and his wife announce, it started to become much more apparent to people that this is really going to happen. So I would, yes, again, I'm not going to force them. I'm not going to short circuit the legislative process, but I think they're thinking the same way. This is a perfect time for us to be efficiently done, get the work done of democracy, debate this, reach some compromises, and then get back home to what they need to do too.
Governor, I know you can tell the legislature what they should do, but at some point, might you recommend that they pass these things quickly and adjourn on the U.S. Capitol?
I do recommend.
April 1st. What are you going to recommend?
That's right. I do recommend that. And I appreciate you prefacing that, Tom, with I'm not here to attempt to tell them that. I don't want to short circuit that. I want to continue to be clear as there's some bills that are happening around COVID that we will start putting out our recommendations or what we would like to see them do. But I'm very aware that they need to do their business, but I think it just behooves all of us that this is not the time to posture around issues that we're not going to reach consensus around, not the things that aren't going to get done. And it would be best just to focus, because if we get this done, this puts us in a strong position for spring flooding. It puts us in a strong position for the COVID situation. It puts us in a strong economic position by having that contracyclical jobs bill out there. And let's just take advantage of what we've been saying. Now is the time to rebuild our infrastructure. We will get through this. We will move through this. The economy will respond accordingly. We can do multiple things, but I don't think now is the time to be here to try and make political points alone. They will come up to that ultimate decision. My suggestion to them would be, let's finish as quickly as possible, reach a compromise, and move on.
Governor, presumably you're making some contingency plans for closing the executive branch agencies. What is the status of those plans at this point?
Yeah, we will update you more. Our continuance of operation plans have been something we've been thinking about for months, obviously. The commissioner has been working on that, what we do with our workforce. We are working what remotely looks like. The video teleconferencing in my residence has been set up, tested, and running. All of those things are ready to make sure the continuity of operations works. We will starting to be, and I know the public is really eager, and they should be, and I think concerned on making sure messages are clear. They're hearing from other states of things that are happening. This virus takes on different takes in different places. It's communicable. The nature of it is different in certain places. We're still trying to understand that, and we're striking the balance always with public safety in mind, but making sure that we're not making the situation worse. I know in New York City, talking about closing schools would put 100,000 children who are homeless on the streets, which would not improve the situation any. So those contingency plans are happening. I think what you could expect as a group here over the coming day or days to see a much more concrete plan of what that dial looks like. We're looking at CDC guidance on how to move through these steps of community mitigation, but to be very honest, they're relatively vague in some areas just because of the nature of this virus developing differently. But you will start to hear that. We will start to make those recommendations, because I think that the public's need is to get fact-based, science-based from the public health officials data, and making sure that it is clear and coordinated and that our messages are coming out. Yesterday I had the opportunity to speak to the House DFL caucus and the House Republican caucus. That's not a usual occurrence on a day, but it's happening. They're hungry for that information. And listening to those members talk, we're all talking the same language now because they're being briefed by MDH, but that will come quickly.
Governor, what is the full dollar amount of this supplemental budget, and how much was that scaled down from what you originally anticipated?
Yeah, I think, and I could get Commissioner Franz in our first year, it's roughly 256 million, and in the second years of the biennium, 268, leaving about 1.2 on the bottom line. To tell you this process of a supplemental budget, I can see some of the staff in here shaking their heads. This is a long process. We start with our overall goals and our values. As I've often said, a budget is more than a fiscal document. It is also a moral document, a reflection of our values. I always was under the belief that we needed to be very cautious. We needed to leave it on the bottom line. And there's a lot of things in here that are really hard decisions. I think it's been up that I would, given the right situation, and if we weren't in this economic situation, would have liked to include it in this, but now is not the right time. So that's where we came to.
Representative Noor yesterday introduced a bill on unemployment compensation, perhaps using the unemployment fund for quarantined people, people who lose their jobs because of COVID. Is that something that should be?
Yeah, I think this is smart stuff. And on the individual bill, I'm not going to endorse an individual piece of legislation, but it's that type of thinking that we're getting around. What about people who are uninsured? How are we getting them in? I think it's that type of thing that I would, again, going back to this question and of how quickly they should get done. I think those are the types of things that should be done along with the bonding bill and along with the supplemental, is move some of those things. I think those are the exact same things that are being talked about in D.C. about how do we make sure that's available. And I think if there is a mechanism, and I'm intrigued by the unemployment insurance side of things, because that mechanism is already there.
Governor, can you speak in specifics about what things will look like? You say the state will look different next Thursday. You say we'll learn specifics about potential plans. Can you get into specifics?
Yeah, I can't anticipate where they'll be, other than that there is, like I say, there's an anticipated steps that you go through in community mitigation. I think you're seeing some of those already play out, where large gatherings are starting to be canceled. The NCAA's decision to have no fans at their events. I think in Minnesota you'll start to see some more guidance specifically around that. And we're working very closely with the advisory committee is working with the business community on how to do that. And in Minnesota it's very unique. Say, for example, something like Ecolab, because of their importance in cleaning and food-based protections, have global implications. And so we're working with them. I think what you can expect to see is a relatively, and again, it's hard to say as the virus starts to change itself, where you see in New Rochelle in New York, where there's kind of a containment area because of an unprecedented increase in spike. We hope to give a little clearer and a little more guidance around what those will be like. But to predict what it'll look like, I can't tell you exactly. I just know that, as I said that last Thursday, our staff is, as we talk to governors, things that like Mike DeWine's doing in Ohio, or talking to Jay Inslee, and my chief of staff, Chris Smitter, is talking to his counterparts in these states. Those people there saying, and we're feeling this, it's like talking to your future self, and they feel like they're looking back into the past, because they're saying, oh, I remember when we were where you were when we had 5 cases and now we have 500. And so those are the types of things we're trying to learn from and strike that proper balance, and listening to the best advice on what works. There's folks say, close everything right now, close the schools. We're looking at what the advice says. Does that really slow or flatten the communicability of it, or does it actually add more problems to it, in addition to the social issues of where does a child eat, where are they getting their care?
Despite your concerns about trade, at the international trade that Minnesota's businesses depend on, especially given the president's remarks last night?
Yes, I am deeply concerned, and I understand that the remarks were inaccurate and then corrected, that we will still be trading with Europe, and that will not come in. Yes, I'm deeply concerned at a time when our markets were already deeply damaged by trade wars, especially in agricultural products, and now we're seeing travel restrictions that I think some of us, and we're listening to the health experts, are trying to understand that the virus is already here. How does that help? I was looking, to be honest with you, more on test kits, personal protective equipment, national stockpiles, some of those types of things. So yes, I am concerned about this. I think it, again, warrants us caution, caution, caution. If there was ever a time for a one-page budget and leaving money on the bottom line, this is it.
Governor, quick follow-up to the previous question I asked about the contingency planning. Has the judiciary been in touch with you, and have they communicated their plans to you?
They have, and we will all be meeting today with Chief Justice Gilday in the Four Corners. Those things have been there. I talked to the Chief Justice the other day. We were talking more about this supplemental budget and what would be in it. But then preparing for this, yes, of what happens, because we're thinking about everything, and I do think it's really important. We have to have continuity of our system. We have to have things work. The judiciary is going to need to work. They're thinking about what does that look like in a courtroom? What would happen? So yes, we are in contact, and those will be part of it. And those are the things that are being fleshed out. And what we recognize is, and I would tell you, just give us, we're doing the 1 o'clock briefing today, and I think you'll see an acceleration of news coming out and the ability to get that to you, is that for every move we make, it kind of adds 10,000 more questions about what that means. And we're trying to think holistically about communicating very clearly and very comprehensively and cohesively to make sure that the biggest thing in this is to make sure that people feel comfortable and not confused. They know how things are being done. They know what will happen in this contingency. And I think showing them on that mitigation plan about where steps would go, of those who would say, well, why don't we go just to full quarantine? Well, the public health experts say that is not only not needed, it might be actually go against that. I had someone who did get one, yes.
If I can ask you, Governor, can you just summarize the current state of the Minnesota economy in terms of how much we've got in the rainy day fund, this $1.2 billion that you're talking on the bottom line,
yeah.
And also maybe which things did you leave off that you would have liked?
Yeah, I'm going to have Myron get on this. I say this because it's, for me, these are the best teachers. Again, someone who's not usually out front, but our budget director, Britta Rayton, of talking to me about different things. How did we come to that number? And that number is with a 95% confidence level against an economic shock that we would be able to weather that. Now, someone may ask this, and Myron may speak about this, that maybe this is in that 5% that wasn't anticipated, but I'll let him tell you where we're at. That's why I stressed, starting in November, the 491 is not just a made-up number. It's important to be in there because of the size of our state government, our expenditures that we are obligated to spend on, and why that needs to be there. So.
Thank you, Governor. Yeah, so what happens at this point with the $1.5 billion that we had forecasted on February 27th, That is sort of on the bottom line for 20 and 21. So what we will do, and the reason we wanted to leave $1.2 billion there was to get us through this uncertainty. But as you know, as I mentioned earlier, the revenue streams are going to be dropping and the expenditure accounts are going to be going up. So that number is going to be changing on a daily basis. But nonetheless, it gets us down the road a ways. Then what happens if we get to a point down the road, hopefully quite a ways down the road, if we get into a deficit situation where that money is no longer available, then we have access to the $2.359 billion. That's what's there now. And if we don't restore the $491 million now, then in a year that will come out of the budget reserve account. We want to make sure it's there because let's assume we weather through this, whatever this scenario is and how long it takes, and then we go into an economic downturn. If we're able to weather this with our current assets, we want to make sure that that budget reserve is there for an economic downturn. There are a number of things that can cause, as we know, economic downturns, and as the governor mentioned, the budget reserve amount was determined to be there with a 95% degree of accuracy about projecting what kind of recession there might be, but no one put this on the table. And so that's why we're in uncharted territory.
It's safe to say that the 1.5 isn't really 1.5 at this point, right?
Actually, it's never really 1.5 billion. So, I mean, it really does change on a daily basis. When we do a forecast, we list all these risks, and we listed this as a risk. Clearly, this risk is growing, but there are other risks on there as well. And so there's always a change, and we will see this flow through the revenue reports and the expenditure reports that we get.
And we have an update on risk of recession?
I'm sorry, what?
Risk of recession?
Oh,
you know,
that has not changed yet from our consultants, but you're seeing economists are really having an opportunity to give a new opinion every day, I think. And so we haven't had that change yet.
So the reserve,
I'll go back.
In other words, the reserve money is real money. The projected surplus is just a guess of what you'll have based on how the economy performs.
Right. The $1.5 billion balance that we projected on February 27th is projected over the next 16 months to come in.
Governor, do you plan to cancel, postpone your State of the State address or deliver it in a different way?
There's talk already on that. Again, that I am the guest of the House and the Senate joint. We have talked about that, of what that looked like. We started talking about it 2 weeks ago, and then it was more theoretical. Now it's becoming closer. So yes, there are talks on how best to do that. Everything from if it would have been appropriate, and we'll get it from the health officials to deliver it in the traditional way, or if you look at Facebook Live or postpone or something. So yes, those are exactly the type of things we're thinking about. We can take a few more, Teddy.
What does your administration recognize as any sort of weaknesses in the pandemic planning? I think the state prisons announced no longer visitation to the state prisons, but in terms of other potential vulnerable populations, what weaknesses has the pandemic planning revealed?
Homeless populations, we've been in, of course, long-term care facilities. Our state veterans homes are ones, and the prison situation is one. And I think you have to, again, when decisions like that are made, there is a ripple effect of how you have to look at that. When you make a decision like that in a prison, it ratchets up the potential for unrest, if you will. And what we have to do is, when you say you're not going to get visitors, of protecting against we don't have some type of disturbance or riot situation. So we are thinking on all of those, of what those look like, with the experts in there, and then the contingency plans. Tom?
Governor, back here at the Capitol, what is your view of political rallies, demonstrations, school groups on tours? I see school buses out in front now. Any recommendations you might make about that in the future?
Yeah, I think what you're going to see, again, this goes to that ratcheting up community mitigation. We have yet to receive, and it's usually, as I think it's important, the health department tells us not to view it as necessarily a trigger, but we've been, I think, anticipating that first community transmission that's not coming with direct contact with foreign travel, and folks are starting to caution against that. I think that's exactly the point we're in within hours to days, to start thinking about very clear recommendations. And that's where I need to, especially in the space of the Capitol, be in concert with the Speaker of the House, with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, with the Majority Leader of the Senate, of thinking about that. But yes, those conversations are happening daily. Already today I had a brief. I will leave directly from here where we will be briefed again. But those are the things that I think you can expect. And I think, again, as I close here, being very clear, we will do our very best to try and make sure that we are communicating as often and as clearly as possible with you, because this is a point. One of the things that we're hearing is the most important thing we can do is get good information out to people, and that is going to be a partnership with the folks in this room. I would be remiss if I did not close in talking about, and I hope you see us modeling this, of social distancing, of continuing to wash your hands, continuing to cover your cough. Please, please, please continue to stay home if you are ill, and know that we are very cognizant of asking a hourly wage worker to stay home without things in place. That's why the legislature, and I would encourage them to work on some type of safety net for those people. But I think what you can expect is an increased pace of information coming out and a clearer plan along CDC recommendations as we start moving through the mitigation. Again, our future selves, if you will, in states around the country who are a little further ahead are examples, and some of it is working, some of it is not. So we are in a somewhat advantageous position of lessons learned to apply those before we have to apply them. But we will have the 1 o'clock briefing. I'm going to leave right now and go get with Greater Minnesota Press and kind of do this again with them, but we'll stay in close touch. So thank you.